All right, welcome back. We are Game 2014 in the fall 2021 semester at George Brown, and it's Mobile Game Development 1, and it's week 2, part 2 of our broadcast. And in this part, we're going to do the tech piece, which is how to connect Unity to Git using Git and GitHub. All right, so to start, what I've asked you guys to do is a couple things. I said, go up on using Unity hubs. I asked you last week to download and install Unity 2021.1 19F1, and I'm hoping that you guys went ahead and did that. However, what if it's this week and you wanted to install the editor from scratch again? Could you do it? Well, if I go to install editor, you see that on other versions, I see 2021.1 20F1 is available, but not 19F1. And the reason for this is because every week they keep on releasing new versions. So please, if you go to your download archive, if you haven't had a chance to download the version of Unity that I'm using, please ensure that you get the same version of Unity so that you're on the same page as me. If you click on the download archive, and I'm getting a bit of a slowdown today, you'll be able to do that. So you go to the download archive, and you can see that September 1st was when 1.19 was released, and September 9th was when 1.20 was released. Again, the differences between the two, I'm sure, are very small. And if you want to always look, you can always see the release notes and see what the difference is between one version and the other. There usually is some fixes, usually some bug fixes and patches and things that they wanted to include in this release, but it's kind of like a weekly release or just about a week apart between one release and the other. And so the differences are very, very small, okay? Where we want to look is things like mobile. Is there some reason for us to upgrade? So mobile, it says app stops due to one pixel copy finish listener not being supported on devices with lower than 24 SDK. Okay, so will this affect us? Potentially, but I don't think it's a big risk for us to move from version 1.19 to 1.20. And that's why we keep things the way they are for a while we're using, while we're working within the semester. So I'm using 1.19 F1, and that's the recommended version for you, okay? The other thing I introduced last week was Git Crack. I said, use Git Crack, and Git Crack is a tool that I use for pushing objects or my folders to GitHub. As an example, Git Crack is a nice tool, but this week what I'm going to get you to do is download Git for Windows. So again, if we go to let's go to the proper tool. If you go to git-scm.com, and again, I put this link in the content folder for week 2 up on Blackboard, but I'll also copy it in your chat for the people that are here in Zoom. And for the people watching on YouTube, you can also just go to git-scm.com. And what you want to do is you want to download this package for Windows. If you're running your Unity on a Mac, as an example, then Mac OS comes with Git packaged in its terminal. All right, so it's not like you need to do anything. It might not be the same version as this one, but it's okay. They also have a package for Mac. So, for example, if you wanted to update Mac's default, build, you could use Homebrew to do that, and it tells you how to do that, okay? So kind of neat, but we don't care about that. We care about Windows. For most of us, we're Windows users, and when you download that and you launch it, I'm just going to get to that right now. Let's download, go to downloads. You can see that I've downloaded already, and if I launch the, launch the app, you're going to see that there is a dialog box that pops up. Now, if you're asking, should I do this, Tom? The answer is yes, you should, because what I want you to do is I want you to have your command line as a backup for your user interface. So I'm going to close down Git Kraken for this one. as an example. And if you have anything that requires the user interface to work, for example, I don't know, if you have Visual Studio Code open or some other application, not Visual Studio, but anything that could be using the command prompt in the background, close it off. It's your safest option. If you've already installed Git for Windows before and you're just upgrading, you'll notice that there's a little checkbox down here that says only show new options. For us, we're going to assume that you have never installed Git for Windows, and I'm just going to click Next. Here I've selected several options. A couple of them that I haven't selected are Git for large file support. I'm not selecting that right now, as well as check daily for Git for Windows updates. The rest I've selected, and I've done that because it makes sense for some of the stuff that they recommend you download. Next. Here it's asking for the standard or default editor for Git if you're launching it from a command line, okay, for Git Bash as an example. There are several options here. I've chosen Visual Studio Code because I have Visual Studio Code installed for the on my system. And some people always ask, what is Visual Studio Code? What's the difference between Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio? If you look at Visual Studio Code, it is a code editor, and there's nothing wrong with using Visual Studio Code for Unity as well. However, I found that when it comes to the difference between Visual Studio, Microsoft Visual Studio, compared to Visual Studio Code, I think I still prefer to use Visual Studio because of the built-in support for ReSharp or C#, because we're going to be scripting in C#. All right, so that is the reason why I prefer it. However, Visual Assist, again, apparently can be also accessed through Visual Studio Code, and I think both of those two platforms are great from a coding perspective. So it really depends on what you want. There's also Rider from JetBrains. So if you go to JetBrains and we want to look at Rider, it's called Rider. So again, it's a cross-platform. It says .NET ID. So again, it supports C#. That's what it is. And it really is made to support Unity, right? So that's what it is. So Rider is another application that's also very popular. It's becoming more popular for Unity. If you have the JetBrains educational license, you can always use Rider as your editor of choice. And there's nothing wrong with it. It gives you really great support. Again, it is normally a paid for or proprietary application. It's not free to use for this at all, but because we're students and most of us have subscribed to the JetBrains educational account, Rider is also an option. But that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here, and I've letting you catch up, is use Visual Studio as Git's default editor. Rider isn't included here. What is included is Atom and Sublime Text. These are two very popular editors, as well as Notepad++. Choose something, and so we can click Next. It doesn't really matter. Most likely we won't be using it. Next. Let Git decide is the next option, adjusting the name of the initial branch in new repositories. Over the last little while, the default branch name master has really become less popular just because of the social issues that surround the name master and the reference to master and slave. So Git has been a little bit progressive and moved ahead to change their main branch to main, which is good. And other industries have done the same thing. Example, the real estate industry with their master bedroom, they've changed that around and now it's the primary bedroom. And these are good changes, happy changes, that are more inclusive. And so too has Git moved on. So that's why I'm saying let Git decide, click Next. Adjusting your path environment. Again, I use Git and optional Unix tools from the command prompt. I like to use Unix tools from the command prompt, so that's why I've chosen this option. Click Next. Use bundled OpenSSH for the SSH executable. That's what I'm using. Next. For HTTPS transport, I'm using OpenSSL. Next. And for configuring the line ending conversions, I'm using check out Windows style, commit Unix style, line endings, click Next. And then for configuring your terminal emulator to use with Git Bash, I'm using Windows default console window. This one, this option. Click next. And then for choosing the default behavior for Git pull, I'm using default, which is fast forward or merge. Click next. And then this is important, choosing a credential helper. I recommend the Git Credential Manager Core, which allows you to, once you connect this to your GitHub account, it remembers your credentials, so you don't have to always log in every single time you push to GitHub. And then click next. And then configuring extra options, I recommend enable file system caching and enable symbolic links. This really helps. And then next, but please do not use experimental support or built-in file system monitor. I recommend experimental stuff is good for experimenting, but for us, we're going to be using this Git for Windows for school. I don't recommend this. Click install to complete your installation for Git for Windows. And the way you do it, you check it after you install. It's going to take you a few moments to do that. I've already done it, so I'm not doing it again. Is you go to your Windows button here on the left, and you search for CMD in the search bar, so command prompt, and that'll bring up your command prompt when you're ready, and type in the command git ---- version and press enter, and you should see a version that's similar to 2.33.0.windows.2. If you've already done this and your version is a little bit behind, but still you've got Git for Windows available and working on your command prompt, you don't have to do these things if you don't want to. I mean, for the most part, Git is going to work just fine with the older version. And if you're on a Mac, chances are your Mac is not going to be use the same version of Git as we will for Windows. Okay, so I'm just going to wait till you guys get there. So for the people that are here right now, can we see a check mark for those people who have installed, Git on Windows? So if you finish installing Git for Windows, check mark in on the Zoom participants panel for your reactions. And if you haven't, or if you can't, that's a better one. If you can't do it, press X. If you're going to do it later, it's okay. If you're just watching. Or you might also be choosing not to do it. That's on you. But I recommend it as a backup to any kind of application we download and use. Sometimes you can't resolve merge conflicts and other issues with a user interface for GitHub. Okay, so I see I almost have half of you have completed the installation. And thank you for that. Going to wait a couple minutes until just a few more people. So we just have more than half now. There we go. Okay, great. Awesome. All right, thank you for that feedback. So I'm going to move on now. So now that we have this, I don't need it. I'm using this as backup for Git and GitHub. So the next piece is let's run Unity for the first time again. So again, going back to Unity, I'm using the new Unity Hub beta for Unity. And I'm going to click on projects, and I'm going to click on new project. And notice it says editor version here. Please make sure if you have multiple editor versions installed that you install or you start with the version that we're using today, which is 2021 1.19 F1. Alex says, you have to go into command prompt to get that, Alex. Is it giving you an error? What is it giving you when you're in command prompt? Okay, so here, once I've selected an editor version, then I'm going to choose 2D Mobile as my template. So click that, and then make sure you name your project appropriately. And what I recommend is put in something like GAME2014 in the fall 2021 semester. And what you want to put is Lab 1. I'm going to put in Lab 1B because I've already done Lab 1A with the other team. I'm also going to target the right folder. So I'm going to target, George Brown under Game 2014, and then press select folder. So this is where my app will start, 2D mobile, and then create project. Okay, Alex, we'll try and fix it later on. It's not critical at this stage. All right, so now I'm launching Unity for the first time today. So some people have asked, are we going to piggyback on the stuff we did last week, or are we going to do a new thing? For today, we're going to do a new thing. We're going to start some of these things over again. I want to show you the settings and the configuration one more time in order for you to see it again, and then we can talk about how everything should be working. I'm just going to shut all these extra windows down so that way we just see Unity. All right. Now this will take a different length of time depending on how many people or what your system configuration is. By the way, it'll take a lot longer the first time you start a Unity project compared to the next time, because the next time you have all your libraries and packages that have been installed correctly, and right now you don't. Right now you don't have any packages or libraries, and so that's why again Unity is taking so long to load. One thing to note is if you're watching me and my performance goes down, so when you're watching the feed, whether it's on Zoom or whether it's on YouTube, and you see that the feed is like sparking out, or I'm turning into a robot when I'm talking or something, like the people said in the first one, a lot of times it happens when I'm building or loading Unity, okay? All right, so this is not the build we would normally see, or the layout. My last week's layout that I had was this one. I stopped you guys with this layout, and if you don't even have this layout and you're starting off with something that looks like this, I talked about how to build a different layout for your project last week, and I talked about how you can customize the tabs here in Unity and align things the way you like. Joss, who is the other professor that's teaching Unity this semester, may have done things a lot differently than me, and you have to decide for yourself how best you work. I'm not going to monitor that or force you to do it this way. I'm going to recommend certain best practices. For me, what I recommend is a slightly different layout than last week. So last week our layout looked like this, like I said, and this is okay if I was doing a a landscape app. But this week, I want you guys to create a portrait app, so one that goes up and down, because that's the kind of app I want to make. So we want to modify this workspace, and the easy way to do that is to pull the simulator here, right, and have your scene appear on this side. And then what you can do is you can flip the screen so that the camera in the simulator appears at the top. You can zoom out a little bit so that you can see the full phone here, and you can zoom in a little bit, and so you can see in the editor what the phone would look like here. And the reason why I would do it this way is because now when I work here, I instantly see my feedback right here, what it's going to look like in preview mode. So this is a great way of working, again, side by side, and you can see both things at the same time. I've created a custom layout for this. If you go to here and you go to save layout, you can save your layout, and I've already done that. I've named it Tom's 2D Mobile Layout Portrait, and if I go there, it doesn't matter if I go to something else, like for example my default layout by accident, and I go back, or if you give me another layout that I don't use, I can go back to my portrait layout and I can see it this way. Okay, so we talked about that last time. Also last time, I did a couple of changes. Right? One of the changes I did was I started organizing assets. Let's do it again today. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rename our scenes with square brackets. You may choose to use underscores or not do this at all. For example, Joss may say something like, it doesn't really matter, right? or whatever. He might ask you, give you a different, folder structure than me. That's fine. I'm also going to create a folder called scripts. There's a scripts folder. And then there might be other folders that I include later on today. We'll see how it goes. But that's the default folder structure that I have right now. That's great. So I've done the default folder structure. I'm also going to rename my sample scene. Again, what I want to do is I want to change the sample scene name to main. So the way to do that is to go into scenes and change the sample scene to main. I'm just going to reload my scene. And then what I want to do is I want to file, save, and I want to file, save project. So this is kind of my initial setup. Next, what I want to do is I want to switch to mobile. So I'm going to go to File, I'm going to go to Build Settings, and I'm going to select Android and then click Switch Platform. This is going to take a moment, or several if you have a slower system. Okay, so let it do its thing as we're switching from kind of a regular PC, Mac and Linux standalone platform to mobile. In the meantime, while this is doing what it's doing, I've gone ahead and launched LDPlayer. As alternatives, people in the first section kind of said, hey, what about other players? Are they okay to use? And they've mentioned things like, Genymotion, which is an alternative emulator. Again, pretty good, maybe not quite as performant and easy to install as LDPlayer. A lot of them like BlueStacks, which is another Android type emulator. Again, very good. I found in the last times I used BlueStacks, I found that it was not as good when it comes to connecting to Unity. Maybe that's changed over the last little while. BlueStacks is very nice, but it's the connection to Unity that I care about. And there's other ones that are out there that you can find that are Android emulators. The real challenge for me is, does it connect to Unity and does it look like a device in Unity? And if the answer is no, don't use it. Use LDPlayer because that works. Okay, so this is just a couple of additional things while we're waiting for Unity to load. Any ones that can let me play it on my phone? Well, you're talking about screencasting now. So you play it on your phone, you connect your phone to Unity as an example, and for you to try it out, like the Unity remote, I don't recommend that at all. I think Unity Remote is a broken app. But if you're actually, targeting your phone, you plug in your Android phone and you could build towards it. That's obviously the better way to go compared to the emulator. But then you need some kind of screencasting software that allows you to show, your phone on the screen. And we'll talk about that maybe in future sessions where I can actually see on an actual phone what it looks like. Or if you're building for another platform, for example, if you're building for iOS and you're a Mac user, can I show my iOS device on here? So can you cast it and see how that works? Hafsa says, if it works, can we use it? What do you mean if it works? Do you mean like for BlueStacks? I mean, whatever you want as an emulator, as long as it works and it allows you to use it, I'm good. For sure, I'm just saying it may not look as good. If it's for testing purposes, if you're thinking about the Unity remote for testing purposes, I mean, I guess you could use that thing. I don't recommend it. It won't give you the same output as you would if you're using an emulator or the actual phone. It'll look different. If it works on your phone, yes, you can use it on your phone, but you need to use screencasting software so I can record your phone, right? And we'll talk about a couple of them very shortly. All right, so let's move on. So now I'm guessing that you've switched platforms to Android. Let's see who's done it. So check mark if you switched to Android, X if you haven't been able to do it, or for whatever reason. I see that 7 of you so far out of 23, 10. Let's see if anyone else has done it. or at least half of you, I'm hoping. Yep. So more than half of you now have been able to switch to the Android platform successfully. This is good. Thank you for that feedback. I'm going to move on now. For those people who haven't done it and for different reasons, maybe you're watching or maybe you just haven't been able to get Android working, you need to get this working because, you know, when you do your demonstration for assignment 1, part 1, it's got to be from the, it's got to work, and you should basically be targeting Android. Next, let's talk about player settings. So the player settings you want to configure are the following, right? One thing you want to do is you want to change your company name to the name that you want to use. I'm going to use George Brown, if I can spell. And my product name is what it is. My version 1.02, fine. I'm going to go to resolution and presentation. And in this case, it says default orientation, auto rotation. You can say that the default orientation is portrait if you want to, as an example. You could also, if you said auto rotation, then you want to turn off, for this example, I want to turn off portrait upside down, landscape right, and landscape left. So I'm only allowing portrait to work if I do this. So I won't respond to an orientation change because I'm making a game that kind of goes up and down in this case. All right. On other settings over here, I want to go to the graphics API setting, which is kind of a couple down from rendering. And first of all, make sure that this auto graphics API is unchecked, and you want to click on Vulkan, and you want to remove just Vulkan. Keep OpenGLES there, but Vulkan needs to go. Okay, so I'll get rid of that. It is. Yeah. It is different here. That's your default, but it doesn't mean you can't rotate. The next one is when you scroll down, you want to go all the way down to where it says identification. And override default package name is checked. Let's uncheck it. So we uncheck it. Notice it says com.georgebrown, blah, blah, blah. Check it again. You'll have that new name in there instead. And then what you want to do is you want to change this to a reverse DNS order. So I want to kind of lowercase George Brown. I'll come back to your question in a second. And then change game 2014 and F2021 here. And it's lab 1. For you, it's just lab 1. For me, it's lab 1B. We did remove Vulkan, and the way we did that is we went up to graphics APIs, and there was Vulkan. I clicked onto it and clicked minus for Vulkan only, not for OpenGLES, and I removed it. All right, so now that I've chosen my package name, this is a unique identifier for each of your applications you're making, right? As an example, here in the minimum API level, you want to choose 7.1 API level 25, please. You want to also change your scripting backend under configuration. You want to change your scripting backend from Mono to IL2 CPP. And then change your API compatibility level from .NET Standard 2 to .NET 4. You also want to change your target architectures to ARM64 checked. So why did I make these changes? If you wanted to ever put up your app on the App Store, you need to have these checked or else it won't work. The company name can be whatever you want. I just chose George Brown because that's the company that I work for in this case. Or the institution, let's say. Okay, next, now that you have these changes, we could make additional changes down here from an efficiency perspective or to improve performance, but I'm not going to make any other changes. Once you've made these changes, it's in real time. The changes have been applied already. As soon as you make those check marks, just close down your project settings, and we're ready to go to the next step. So I've made my changes to my project. the change that I recommended to you. And now the thing to do is where it says run device, some people have run device grayed out. That means there's something wrong with your installation. You shouldn't have run device grayed out. It should say default device here. What you want to do though is you want to click refresh, right? And what you want to be able to do is pull down the emulator that you've selected. So for example, if you said it's BlueStacks, there should be an indication here that it's BlueStacks that you're connecting to. If you've connected your phone should appear here, okay? And again, in order for you to display it on your phone, you need to put your phone in developer mode. We haven't talked about how to do that, as well as set up your USB support for your mobile phone. Okay, so there might be some drivers you need to install on your Windows machine or Mac. I'm going to select Samsung, the emulator that I've chosen, in LDPlayer. Okay. And once we have this ready to go, I've already modified my settings and I've selected my Samsung, kind of emulator on LDPlayer. I'm ready to build. Let's do a build and run. So I'm going to click build and run. So Nathan, you see an IP address? Is it an IP address to your phone, perhaps? Are you building something that is for your LDPlayer? You have nothing connected. Well, that's bad. You need to connect something or you can't build. So connect something, whether it's LDPlayer, launch LDPlayer, launch your BlueStacks, launch something, connect your phone, do something. If you don't launch LDPlayer, it won't connect. One thing that people have had trouble with is virtualization. So remember that an emulator usually is a virtual machine that runs in some kind of virtual environment using a host machine, which is your machine, as well as Unity doesn't see it. Okay, so if Unity doesn't see it, a lot of times if LDPlayer is not seen, again, go to settings. And a lot of times they go to other settings, and the problem is where it says ADB debug. For me, I have open connection. You might have open local connection. This must be selected here in order for us to do connect to Unity. And you have to save and restart potentially your LDPlayer. All right, but you should see your emulator is what I'm saying. If you see your emulator, then you should be able to go and build and run. If I click build and run now, it'll bring up a file explorer dialog window. And what you want to do is you want to target a new folder that doesn't exist by default. Let's make a new folder called builds. And under builds, I want to target builds, double click, and make my new file name as lab1. I'm going to choose mine as lab1b because I've already made lab1a and it's going to go online. I don't want to clash. I don't want to have my APKs clash. So that's why I'm going to make it lab1b. It's going to be a file, an APK file that's going to live inside the builds folder of your application, not inside your assets folder. I'm going to click save. And when I do that, it's going to start building. Now, right now, you may see me spark out, right? Because I'm using all my system resources to make this build happen. So I'm going to stop talking for a bit. Now, as you can see, I'm sparking out, and it's taken quite a bit of time. When you do this for the first time, or even the next time, it'll take quite a bit of time for this to complete. Give it your time to do it. And the reason for this is because it takes an inordinate amount of system resources for you to build for Android. So if you're watching this video, just fast forward to when the build is done. Now, once you get to this linking stage, right, it's good news. It's going to next go to the Gradle build. Gradle is like a package manager for Android. And what it's doing is it's building up your APK, your Android package. And once this is done, when you're in this stage, you're pretty much almost done. And then in Unity, what it'll do is it'll launch Android Logcat. And Logcat is very similar to a call stack. So you can see things like memory problems and that kind of stuff on the emulator. So it says Samsung SM G975N as an example, and it looks at all the processes that are running on your device. And this is very important to understand what's happening. If there's any errors that come up, they'll come up here, or any warnings, they'll come up here in yellow, okay? But you can see now that we're launched. I'm just going to close down Logcat for a second, and I'm going to pull up LDPlayer. All right, that's here. And you can see that we've switched, LDPlayer actually switched into portrait mode immediately when I built for it from my app. It also gives me a tabbed view. If I close it, it'll switch back to landscape mode, and it'll list the lab that I made here as an icon, which I can always recall and launch again. And you can see that I get the Unity logo and I started my app. Okay, so going back to you guys, are you with me? Who's been able to launch their app in LDPlayer and all that kind of stuff, build for mobile by now? If you're still working on it, I understand some people will take a little bit more time, right? Michael says he's almost there. It doesn't change its portrait mode. Andrew says he's still building. Jing says my CPU is burning. Yeah, I hear you, man. My CPU burns too, and I have a pretty crazy CPU, but it still burns, right? So, again, just bear with it. I know there's about 7 of you who've claimed that everything is working. This is okay. Some people may be still waiting for the build to complete, right? It'll take some time. Ben, what's the problem? You've got an X. Does that mean you crapped out, or what happened? What is it still building, Ben, or what's happened? Arctic says it's still working. Long story, don't worry about me. I got to worry about you, man. All right, but anyways, we'll move on for now. All right, so again, 8 people this time out of 23, so not quite half. I was hoping for more, but I know this process takes a long time, and depending on the way your machine has been built and the performance that you have and what you're running at the same time, because we're all running Zoom, we're all running different applications here at the same time. It may be a big enough load that it slows you down. Okay, now I got about 10 or 11 people that have said that they're good. Okay, so I'm just going to clear all the feedback. Thank you for that feedback, and let's move on. All right, so that's great. So we've got that built, and let's get back to Unity. So the Unity build was good, and that's a good start. The reason why this is a great start, and I built it literally with nothing in it, is because, hey guys, if Unity won't build your app when there's nothing in it, it's never going to build your app if you add stuff onto it, right? So imagine if we add new scenes and stuff and whatever, and if it didn't build, then it will never build. Okay, so let's move on to the next piece. So what I want to do now is I want to do File, Save Project. So again, to safeguard Unity might crash or something like that. I know that everything's okay now. I'm going to I want to open up Unity. So I want to right click on any asset folder like scenes, and I want to show and explore. And you can see that I want to go back out to the name of the project. So GAME2014 Lab 1B. And then when I'm here, I want to close Unity down. So I'm going to go File, and I want to go Exit. And I want to let Unity gracefully close. So what this does is it closes down all your meta files. and then it allows us to, this is the perfect place to put it up on GitHub. Now I'm going to use Git Crack for this. So I'm going to pull up Git Crack. You should, again, I'm assuming that you've downloaded it and installed Git Crack. I'm not going to do command line yet, not this week. Right? And when Git Kraken pulls up, what I want to do is I want to target my, the folder that's already been created and make a repo from that folder. Nathan says, mine got a Gradle build failed when it finished. Yeah, so Gradle build failed means it wasn't able to create your APK for some reason or another. And that's not a great sign. Something's not working and there's nothing in that thing. So there might be a problem with your Android installation, your Java, something's wrong for it to get that Gradle build failed when it finished. All right, so it also could mean that you're not connected to, for whatever reason, it may have built the APK, but maybe for whatever reason it didn't transfer it to your app because maybe your LDPlayer or BlueStacks or whatever you're using or your phone is just not connected properly. All right, so let's go to the next step, which is starting a local repo. So if we have a folder that's we have successfully made, we did. If we go back to this, we know that this is the folder that we've made for Lab 1B. This is the folder that we need for our Lab 1 that's due Friday at midnight, this folder right here, right? Remember, what I'm looking for is a link to your GitHub repo. We haven't made that yet. Let's do it. So with Git Kraken, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go start a local repo. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on local only if it has not clicked on already. And then where it says initialize in, make sure that it's pointing to the right external folder. So the folder must be one level higher than the folder that you're working in. So your working folder might be, your project folder might be Lab 1B like mine, or just simply Lab 1. But the containing folder, whatever folder contains that folder, like mine is, in the example is GAME2014, that is what I'm clicking on for my main folder where it says initialize in. Then what I want to do is I want to click on my actual project folder, copy the name of it here in File Explorer, cancel, and then go back to the name of your repo and paste that name of your project folder in here, which gives you the full path of, see, users, your name, whatever, if you're using OneDrive or not, desktop, wherever you put your folders, GBC, GAME2014, GAME2014, F2021, Lab 1 for you. That is my full path. So you see it here. If you see some other path, or if you only see GAME2014, so it's going to go to the wrong folder, and it's targeting the wrong folder for a Git build. The default branch name I'm leaving as main. And here's something key. When you use Git Kraken, it allows you to specify a git ignore template. I think this is good. So you click on the git ignore template and select Unity. Just type in the word Unity, and it gives you a Unity git ignore file. The Unity git ignore file and git ignore files in general, what they do is they ignore certain folders or files that are listed inside of them. So example, it creates a file called .gitignore. And whatever is listed in there is not put up to GitHub. So things we don't want to put up on GitHub that are always regenerated when we start up a new project are the library folder. We want to ignore the library folder, and we want to ignore the builds folder we just made, right? Because we don't want to put our build and the APK up on GitHub. We can always regenerate those things. Otherwise, they take an inordinate amount of space on GitHub, and sometimes they even fail because there's a large file that's over 100 megabytes that'll prevent you from pushing your files up to GitHub, and that's why we need a Unity git ignore template. The next thing is the license. I recommend an MIT license for what we're doing today. And do we want to initialize the repository with large file support? The answer is no. I'm not doing anything with it right now. Maybe next semester we will. And then create your repository. What this does is it does your initial commit, right? And in the background, what it's done is git init, git add dot, git commit -m, initial commit. But it didn't do the git add dot properly. Again, we see that there are unstaged files. So we want to click on stage all changes here in Git Kraken. And then we're going to make a commit message, and we're going to say added project files. And then I'm going to commit changes to these files. Now you have two commits locally. Notice that there is the local machine, right? Initial commit and added project files. So those are the two commits. I want to push these two commits onto GitHub, but I don't have a repo yet, a GitHub repo. But let's do it anyway. Let's just click the push button. So if I click the push button, it's going to say, hey, there's no remote. Do you want to make one? The answer is yes. And it's going to say, cool. Now, this would have been configured before with you and Git Kraken, where you connect your GitHub account to Git Kraken. Here it's going to say, which account do you want to use? Because I have more than one. I'm going to choose George Brown College. And then the repo is going to be the same name. My remote name is going to be origin. I can put a description. So for example, demo project for GAME2014 Lab 1 in the fall 2021 semester, right? Like you can put as much detail as you want, right? And this is just going to be a description on the GitHub repo, okay? The other thing to note is you can choose between public and private access. Me, I'm choosing public, but for you, for your assignments and for your lab, you may elect to choose private. And the reason why is because, especially for your assignment, and you want to include me as a collaborator as before, okay? So here, I'm just going to choose public because I'm sharing everything with you, but you may, again, choose to do private. I'm going to click Create Remote and push local references. Let's do that. And if I'm successful, you're going to see that now I have the little, it's hard to see, but there's a little George Brown College symbol that's basically representing my remote repository on GitHub, the origin remote, and my local repository are in sync. They're together, all right? That's what it's showing. I can always look at my repository online by just going to GitHub. So if I go to GitHub, and if I go to George Brown College, you can see that the last repo that I have is this one, GAME2014 F2021 Lab 1B. I'm going to click onto it, and you can see that I should have two commits, one of them that says initial commit, another one that is added project files. Okay, those two commits. I don't have much of a README file. It just does this. And I didn't do this in the first section, but what if I was to change the README file up on GitHub? I'm going to be behind locally. Okay, so how does this work? So let's update it. So we're going to edit the kind of the README file. I want to make it so that we can use Markdown, which is a hashtag followed by a space, makes this like an H1 tag on the web, right? That's Markdown. Then I can add additional details. Similar to what we put earlier with our description, we can say this is a demo app for GAME2014 mobile application development 1 at George Brown College. You can put as much detail as you want. If I can spell Brown. Maybe 2 words, George Brown. In the fall 2021 semester. So you can write whatever details, whatever you want, and more. And then what we want to do is we want to commit changes. It says update README file as the commit message. I'm going to say OK. And when we do that now, I have 3 commits, right? If I go back to code, then you're going to see that I have 3 commits, and these are the 3 commits. One that was done initially through Git Crack, and the second one when I added the project files. The third one when I did an update to the README file on GitHub, but I have a problem. I am behind one commit locally. If I go locally, you can see that Git Crack detects that I have my main branch is ahead of my local branch by one commit. So what I can do is I can pull. And when I pull from the origin, then what's happening is my main branch and my local branch are in sync. And you can see who the commit person was. All right, so this is great. Now we've got our baseline for our project. Let's go up on Unity again and add some additional things. And then we'll stop for the day and I'll take some questions. All right, so let's go back to Unity. Here's Unity Hub. I'm going to start our application. You're going to see that this starts faster than before because now we don't have to create our library or other things. It's already there for us. So the packages are already installed. So I can just like launch Unity. Should be very quick. There we go. And notice that under scripts in Unity, scripts has nothing inside of it. And yet on GitHub, let's go to GitHub for a second. On GitHub, if I go to assets, I have scenes, but I don't have scripts. And I talked about this. Scripts has a meta tag, nice, but doesn't have the empty folder attached to it. Not nice. The way to do this, like I mentioned, is to put a Git Keep file inside of your folder. So going back to Unity, if I was to look inside the scripts folder, if I had nothing in there, but I wanted to retain the structure on GitHub, so let's say I wanted some kind of empty folder to appear on GitHub, I could right-click on scripts, show and explore. It's going to take me right there. And what I can do is I can make an empty file. I can add an empty file here. So right-click, and I can say new text document. And I can rename this text document to .gitkeep. Ask me if I want to do that. I want to. .gitkeep is just a way of putting an empty file in a folder. It's invisible to Unity. So on the Unity side, if I was to go back, it doesn't import. Okay, so I'm not importing Git Keep, but on Git Crack, as an example, you can see that there is a change, right? Git Crack detects a change inside of the scripts folder. We've added a new file called Git Keep. And I won't do it right now, but later on, when we push everything up to GitHub, it will also show the scripts folder up on GitHub because we have a file in there. Cool. Next, what I want to do is add a button to the screen, right? And hopefully what we can do is add a couple of scenes, right? So that we can try going from one scene to the other. Okay. So let's see how this works. So first of all, when I add an asset, I'm going to add it in here. Okay, so let's add a button. So inside the hierarchy, I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to 2D object, right? Or sorry, UI. Now there's a couple buttons we can use. We can use Text Mesh Pro type button. Kiara mentioned Text Mesh Pro earlier. You can do that. It's built into Unity. Or just a regular button. For today, we're just going to make it a regular button. Okay. When I do, the button is kind of invisible. It's like way down there. And as an example, what Unity does is it kind of creates an abstraction. So here's the screen, and it's like a canvas element that floats above the editor. And that's great for maybe a regular 3D scene. And there's your button. So I could choose the W key or, and use my handles to pull the button where it'll appear in the preview in the middle of my screen. So I could do that. I could say, I want to put it right here, right? I could do that. Select the button or I could choose the same thing. I could choose to move this button wherever I want. So I could choose to move it in the middle, like so. The button, though, is accurate as it appears to be very small inside of the safe area of my app. Okay, why is that? Well, it's because of the way my canvas is. So this is my canvas, and it's extrapolated from my actual app, which is way down here. And the reason why they do that is they want to separate the user interface from the gameplay. But here I'm making a menu. So a lot of times what I want to do is I want the canvas to point to the camera, right? So the canvas itself, by default, right, is the container that holds other UI elements, okay? For example, in this case, I have a button. The canvas has a few components built into it. And one of them is a screen space, this canvas element that has the render mode as screen space overlay. I could choose instead to choose screen space camera. If I choose that, I have to specify the camera, and I can take the main camera from the scene and drag and drop it in there. When I do, if I click on the button now and I zoom out, you can see that the camera and the canvas are the same. They're in the same area now. So there's no extrapolation, there's no separation between UI elements and the camera. They're the same. Button is still pretty small though, and the way to change this is going back to the canvas. You can see that there's a couple things that are happening. The plane distance is 100, and we have another component called the canvas scaler. And the canvas scaler uses a different kind of scale mode. One of them is called constant pixel size with a scale factor of 1. So that's a scale factor. We could use this, but for mobile, what we want to do is we want to scale it with the screen. For example, what happens when our screen changes size? I want to try this out on an iOS app, or I want to move it towards a larger screen or a smaller screen. I want to scale my button and my whole canvas with the size of my screen. We need a reference resolution, and the reference resolution should match both in width and in height. I'm just going to put a value of 0.5 in here. In width and in height, the reference resolution of what we're choosing. It's a little better now, but I want to choose a different reference resolution. Which one will I choose? I want to go back to LDPlayer. And in LDPlayer, I've put a resolution setting in advanced. I've chosen to customize my resolution so that the phone's orientation is 2560 by 1440. I want, in this case, because we're portrait orientation, 2560 as the Y. So in here. And then what I want is 1440 as the X. Now this makes the button even smaller, but then we got to look at the reference pixels per unit. If I was to go down to 1, right, you can see that it's kind of a 1-to-1, right? And look at the change that happens here is the width and the height actually becomes 1321 by 2789, in terms of the entire canvas. If I went to 100, right, then this is going to change the reference pixels per point. That's the thing to change. You can leave this alone. But what we want to do is we want to make our button a bit bigger because the button is quite small for the reference resolution. So here I want to click on the button and I want to change my button name from button to start button. Because we might have several buttons. Inside of button itself, remember, is a game object. But it's a special game object because it's inside of a canvas. Whenever we put a UI object inside of a canvas, the transform changes to a rect transform. Okay, rect transforms are slightly different than a regular transform. You can see that the canvas also has a rect transform, but the main camera just has a transform. Same thing with the event system, just a transform. But in anything inside the canvas, it gets a rect transform, which works a little differently. Rect transform we're going to talk about another day, but what it allows us to do is discuss our anchor points as well as other things that are inside here, the pivot and so on. Okay, so that's our start button. So what we want to do with the start button is we want to go into the text value, the text object that's sitting inside of the start button. Remember, game objects are also containers in Unity, so they can contain other game objects. Think about it as a parent-child relationship, where we have the parent game object of the start button is canvas. And the parent game object of the canvas, there is no parent game object, so the only parent is the main scene itself, right? The parent of the text object, the text game object, is the start button, but the grandparent is the canvas, right? Or it's another parent up the chain. So text is inside of start button, and text is like a label, and we can modify the text of the start button to change size with the size of the start button itself. So where it says in the character, we can see that it says paragraph, how we align it, and so on. But down here, there's an option that we can check on called Best Fit. Best Fit allows us to change the maximum and the minimum size of the button so it fits and works properly and is read properly along different screen sizes. We can change the maximum size to something like 80 and the minimum size to something like 20. I don't think, so there you go, 14 is even the minimum. It's actually reducing my minimum. Now what we can do is if we click on the start button itself and we zoom in, we can change the size of the start button. Right now, you can see on the top left corner that the 5th icon is selected right on the top. Remember that the shortcuts for these icons, these control icons to modify or adjust or transform the objects are Q, W, E, R, T. So the T button, press the T button, then what it's done is it takes us into this option here, which allows us to access the Rect tool. And the Rect tool allows us to change the size of our object. Notice when I change the size of my object that the text inside the button also changes size to a maximum of 80 pixels. So let's make it so that the height of the object, if we set 100, you can see that that is the size of the object. We can also make the width of the object something like 500, right, to make it kind of a rectangular button. And we can change the text inside the button by clicking on the text object itself and going to where it says text and just changing it to start. If we want to make sure that the button is aligned to the center of the screen again, we want to click onto it, and we can use our guides to go here by eye. We can do that. We can click into this, or we can change so we can make sure that the, so if I move this around, you can see that the position X and Y changes relative to where we want. But we can always change it so that this is 0 and 0. 0, 0 is the world center for Unity, right? So we can see that it's the exact center of the screen. The start button. It's the first UI element we're going to make. And we start with UI elements here in Unity, okay? We're going to do more of them next week. And I'm going slow because I want to explain some stuff, and next week we'll do it more, okay? Let's make sure that the button works. And so for today, we're going to make our first script. So inside the scripts folder, I'm going to right-click, and I want to create a new C# script. When I click onto it, it'll give me a default name that I'm going to change. And I'm going to change the script name to Start Button Behavior, and then press Enter. When I do that, it's going to make a brand new script. The script right now is unattached. It's not attached to any game object. It's actually not even being used right now. In Unity, in order for me to use a script by default with no other things going on, for the most part, I have to attach it to some game object, or we can make it so that it's a singleton. For now, this start button behavior literally does nothing. In order for us to program the script, we're going to double click on the script itself, which is going to bring up our default editor. In my case, my default editor happens to be Visual Studio 2019. Okay. Notice that when I open it up, I have a public class. So again, C# is structured slightly differently than C++. If you've never used it before, the great thing is I'm able to use ReSharper C#. So if I go to extensions, I can see that ReSharper should be enabled. It's taking its time to initialize as normal. So it's going to start giving me code hinting, just like it did for our C++ side. And you can see that mono behavior is the superclass because of these colons. So my class is start button behavior. My superclass is mono behavior. So we're inheriting everything from the mono behavior superclass inside of start button behavior. Most game objects in Unity inherit from mono behavior. We also have a couple of using statements. Using statements are imports. They're like import statements in Unity, where we can tap into a set of namespaces that would be unavailable unless we use these. So we have three using statements: system.collections, system.collections generic, and our Unity engine. Notice how Unity engine is lit up a little brighter, and these ones here are a little darker, which means they're not being used right now. But they've been put in place as a template. Whenever we start a new script, we use the script template in order for us to do this. We have two functions that are automatically written for us, our start function and our update function. The start function only triggers once when you launch the script, at launch time. When I launch my application, if the game object the script is attached to is in the hierarchy at launch time, when my application starts, the start script will trigger one time. Similar to a constructor, but not. It's just another function. And my update function triggers every frame. Because I'm making a start button, I don't need these two functions. So I'm going to delete them. And it's a good idea to delete functions like these that are unused, because the start function is going to be listened to. It's going to actually be a part of all the start functions are going to be triggered as soon as Unity starts. And the same thing with all update functions. Every frame, Unity is going to be looking for all scripts that have an update function and try and access these things. So we want to, it's because these things right here, Unity references 0 changes, 0 authors. I believe it's because I have Git for Visual Studio installed. And to get that, you need to go to extensions. You need to go to manage extensions. And if you go to online, you should see GitHub extension for Visual Studio installed. And if it's not installed, it should be under, that should be under installed. If it's not installed, you don't see it here, you go to online. And if it's not installed, you'll see like a download button. You download it, and you'd have to restart Visual Studio, and then it'll install the GitHub extension for Visual Studio. All right, so start button behavior is there. That's nice. Everything's nice, but I don't have really an option. I'm going to make a new function, and my new function is going to be public. So in C#, we have to specify public or private for each function. That's good. If you see it, that's good. And then what I want to do is under public, I want to make, it's going to return void, this function. And I want to call this new function on start button pressed. It's a new event. So Unity events are really easy to make. So I've made this up. You don't have to use this. This is not a built-in Unity event. It's something that I've created. So on start button pressed, notice how it's grayed out because it's not being used right now. Inside of there, I want to have a console output function that I'm going to access. It's called debug.log. That's the output function. in Unity. And I'm going to specify that it's going to say start button pressed. Okay. So that's the only thing that's going to happen when the start button is pressed. What I want to happen is this script, when it's accessed, if we connect it to the start button, is going to output start button pressed to the console every time I click the start button. It won't really do it. We won't be able to see it inside of the emulator, because the emulator doesn't have a console, but we'll be able to see it here inside of the log here. Okay. But still, even though we've made this script, this is our first script, start button behavior .cs, CS standing for C#, doesn't do anything. We have to connect it in Unity. We're going to go back to Unity now. And in Unity, what it does is it reloads the script because it notices that I've changed stuff. You can see a preview of the script here on the right-hand side in the inspector, right? It should match what you typed in, okay? And then what I want to do is the start button itself on the bottom, I'm just going to collapse some of these components. The start button on itself at the bottom, you can add component and you can select the start button. That's one way of doing it. So if I start typing start button, it's going to detect the new script that I made. Or, so you can attach it this way. Okay, I've attached now the script, start button behavior script, to the start button game object by just add component. Or, let's remove it. You can also remove a component this way too, by going to the ellipses and saying remove component. It's not destroyed, it's just removed. It's not attached anymore. Or, I can just drag and drop it. If I take the start button behavior and just drag and drop it over the component, it adds it in this way as well. So a couple of ways of adding a component, especially a script, to a game object. What we want is in the button component itself, there is an on-click event that right now is empty. We have our start button behavior script attached already. This is key, critical. And I want to click the plus button to add an event, to add actually a script that is triggered from the event. So when I click the button, this button here, it's going to trigger this on-click event to fire. It's going to trigger the event, right? Right now, it's not doing anything because there's no script attached. Even though I have the script attached here, I have to tell Unity, because this script can be attached, by the way, any place, any game object. I just attach it by luck to my start button. I could put it anywhere. I need to add a click event. It tells me which game object has the script. Again, some people like to put all game objects in, or all scripts in a particular game object for events. For example, I could have put it in the event system component, game object, but I have it in my start button. I just have to pull my start button from the hierarchy into the start button on click event itself. It's almost like I'm pulling the start button into itself. I'm making a self-reference. That's okay, because the script exists inside the start button. On the right, see where it says no function? We need to change this. We can change it to a bunch of different ones. Notice if I say game object, it really doesn't have a script that I can access, right? Or I can go to rect transform. Again, no script that I can really access. Canvas renderer has some defaults, but the one I want is down here where it says start button. I made this script, and if I scroll down, you can see that I made this function called on start button pressed. That's the function that I want to trigger whenever my click event is triggered. So my click event is triggered, or we can say that the event has been raised, right? I want to fire or activate my on start button pressed function. Okay, that's what I want to do. So I click onto it, and now my on start button pressed function is associated with the on click event. And when I do this, to test it, let's test it now in the simulator. I'm going to click plus or play. And then over here, you're going to see very little change. It's running right now. You can see that this button has turned blue. And on the left where it says start, if I click onto it, it's going to show start button pressed in the console window right here. And if I keep clicking onto it, you're going to see 2, 3, 4, 5. It's going to increment how many times I've clicked it. We know now that the start button is functional and that it's accessing the start button behavior script. I'm looking at your script. Hold on a second. I mean, what you're doing there, Kiera, is you are dynamically adding an event every time the button comes into being. So the button comes into being, you dynamically add an event, as opposed to what I did, which is a drag and drop reference. I don't think it's bad. I mean, it's as bad as what I'm doing. The difference with you is if you made a start button prefab, right? Yours might work better than mine. And we'll talk about that later on. It's not wrong to do what you did. I think I like it, actually. It's a nice idea. Okay, so we've got this, but we don't know what it looks like on the emulator, right? We want to push this to the emulator, and this is the last push we're going to do for today. And we're going to put this up on GitHub, and this is the app that you're going to use the way it is right now for your Lab 1 submission, which is going to be for this Friday at midnight. If you follow along already, then this is as simple as doing this. So let's put this up on GitHub. The only thing I'm going to do is file, save project. First of all, I'm going to play it on the emulator first. And then I'm going to go to file, build and run. I'm not going to open up build settings. I'm just going to go build and run. And what this is going to do is it's because I've already built this the first time, it's going to go and do an incremental build. It's still going to be slow, but it may not be as slow as before. And it's going to take up a lot of memory, resources on my system since I'm broadcasting, and I may spark out again. Test it. There, I just sparked out. We need to test it because if we don't test it, then we can't tell if it's going to work properly on mobile. So let's wait until it builds. Again, for those people watching on YouTube, please fast forward to when this is done. Yeah, Nathan, you need to update Java for sure. Try updating. Sometimes Java, when it's a different version, if you had Java installed earlier on your system, as an example, and your version of Java is different than, okay, make sure it matches the version that's installed in Unity. That's the thing that's important. Sometimes if they differ, there's a problem. Or if you've done some Android application development before. All right, so mine built, and let's see what happens when I bring up my app in LDPlayer, and if I click Start, look at this. I actually see it inside of Android Logcat, right? So even though I can't see it here, I can use Android Logcat as my my console. And this is super important, guys, to test if something is working in the emulator, especially if you see it working in the simulator, but somehow something's wrong in the emulator. The emulator gives you, Logcat gives you good hinting as to what might be wrong. So again, if I click it again, you're going to see it generates again. And there's a bunch of other extra stuff that happens here when I do that. This is part of the event system of Unity. Every time I click it, you're going to see that I get several events that are generated, and you can see that the events and the event listener have the same number over and over again. It also tells you the tag Unity. So this is the thing that's generating the problem or the interaction. This is great. We know it's working now in the emulator, and we know it's doing something because whenever I press start button, I'm getting this message in a logcat, right? Which is amazing. Let's stop this, and let's also stop the emulator for a second. We don't care about this. And now we can put our app up on GitHub. So what I want to do is I want to do, again, a file save and a file save project. And once I've done those two things, let's exit, right? We want to exit now. And I want to go back when I'm done closing down Unity gracefully. I want to go back to Git Crack. You can see that I have several files as an example that have updated our Git Keep file, our start behavior, start button behavior, and so on. And I want to stage all changes. Here, I'm going to say added start button to the scene, to the main scene. And then I want to commit changes to 5 files. Here it is. You can see that locally now I'm ahead of my remote, and I want to push this up to GitHub. And when I do, now I'm in sync, okay? And you can see that if I go up to GitHub, so here's GitHub up online. You can see now if I refresh, then you can see that I have in the code area, I have 4 commits, and I have these commits that I just made. This is great because now we're up to date with what we've done, right? So it's awesome that we have this thing happening. We're up on GitHub. So let's go back to finish the day. I know we're running a little bit late, but to finish the day, let's go back online and take a look at the requirements for your Lab 1. So for Lab 1, it says, using the examples in class, put your Unity project up on GitHub. Ensure you include an appropriate .gitignore file. We have that, so that your library folder does not get pushed to GitHub, because that's important. And then submission details, just a working link to your GitHub repo is all required, which is what you have if you followed along. Anyways, guys, that's it for this week. We've been able to put together we've learned a little bit more about GitHub. We've done a little bit more about Unity slowly. We've actually worked with the emulator a couple of times and Git Kraken, and this is where we want to stop for today. Any questions? By the way, for those people who need to connect with me outside of class, office hours normally work best on Fridays for me this semester or after hours. I know you guys have other classes later on, but you can always ding me on Discord, and I can kind of answer some of your questions or even have a one-on-one chat with you if you want to talk to me about your game assignment concept, if you want to do something like that. Benjamin asked, do we need to add you to the GitHub repo so you can access a private repo? Yes, you do, or else I wouldn't be able to access it. Nathan says, not sure what else to do to fix Gradle build failure. Hold up, Nathan. I'll work with you after this. Okay, if there's no other questions, that's it for me, guys, and everyone else. Thank you so much for attending. I appreciate your interaction with me today. My GitHub account name is the following. Sorry, it's this. So just use that when you access just my last name at hotmail.com. That's my general inbox. Thank you from South Korea. I see some people from South Korea like the video. Thank you. Anyone else have any questions? All right, guys. Thank you so much then. If you have no other questions, I'll see you next week. Good luck on your assignment 1, part 1 build. Alex. Also, do I need to install Git, or will Git Kraken in or GitHub Desktop work for the semester? GitHub Desktop works fine. Git Kraken's also okay. I asked you to install Git for Windows, Alex, because I want you to have a backup just in case something goes wrong with the other UI tools. Right. So I'm going to stop recording here on YouTube. Thanks for the people on YouTube, and I'll see you guys soon. All right, for the people here on Zoom, we're not on YouTube